So let's talk a little bit about sitting on the floor because I was saying to you just before we got going, I was like, I'm going to try this. Like, I'm strong. I can do this. And I got down on the ground, no problem. And then I just had to think a moment. I was like, what am I doing now? Like, okay, no hands. I'm not going to use my knees. I'm just going to get up using my feet. There's definitely a little bit of a technique. And then I did it with I started off with my right foot crossed over because that's just my dominant side. And then I did it with my left crossed over my right. And that was a little bit trickier. Like I found, it wasn't quite even from left to right. So I was like, okay. So talk to us a little bit about why sitting, being able to get on the floor and getting up off the floor unassisted. So not coming onto your knees or not using your hands. Why is this an indicator of a dynamic body? The mobility definition that you gave, freely being able to move your body through a range of motion without pain. Why is this a good indicator of that?
Sure. So what you're talking about is called the sit and rise test, and it's based on a 2016 study where researchers put several thousand people through this test. And I'll try to describe it a little bit so people can try it at home. But I will also say that there are 1,000 videos about it online. So if you just go to Google and type in sit and rise test, you can get, we have videos on our own site about this. So you can sort of get a visual if you want to see it. But the basic idea is from a standing position, you cross your legs and slowly with control, lower yourself to the ground. Obviously, if you're going to fall or it's dangerous, you want to do this in a place where, you have a little room, like you could sort of fall backwards because for some people, this test is very difficult. And if you need to put a hand or a knee down, you can do that. But the goal is to lower yourself to the ground without putting a knee or a hand down on the ground. And then from a cross-legged position, be able to stand back up without putting a knee or hand on the ground. And the researchers scored this out of 10, and every point of contact counted as 1. So if on your way back up, you put one hand down and one knee down, that would be an 8 out of 10, for example. And what they learned is that people who scored below an 8 out of 10, that it was an indicator of overall health and mortality risk, and that your mortality risk increased if you were unable to get up and down off the ground. And this does make logical sense because if you look at the fall risk in the elderly and how significant it is, if you can reduce your fall risk as you age, you can see how that would increase your chances of living longer, right? So what I love about this test, and we put it as chapter 1 of our book, is that it is such a quick and easy sort of reality check about your mobility that anybody can do at home. Clear out some space on your living room floor, get your kids involved, get your parents involved. I think one of the things we tried to do in our book is sort of create these objective measures because, everybody knows, for example, that you need to eat fruits and vegetables. That's obvious. Everyone knows that. But how much?
Well, in this
How
day and
often?
age, sometimes, the
Right.
shirtless guy.
Right. And then you have an influencer telling you that bananas are toxic, right? So, I mean, it's very complicated. But we wanted in our book to create sort of a really quick, simple, free test that anybody can do at home to just get a baseline of their mobility. Now, what I can tell you is this test, you do not need to have full hip or ankle range of motion to be able to do this test. It doesn't require that, as you know from doing it yourself. But nevertheless, it does give you a good indication of kind of where you are, especially with respect to your hip and ankle mobility. You get a little bit of good information. And then to sort of play off of that test, the way to get better at the test is to sit on the floor. And I cannot espouse the benefits of sitting on the floor more. If people take nothing away from this episode, please, I hope everybody remembers to sit on the floor for 30 minutes a day. And there are a lot of different ways you can do that. Many of us are lucky enough to be able to work from home. So if I had a hidden camera, on high speed watching me throughout my workday, for example, what you would see is that I spend part of my time standing at my standing desk. I actually do spend part of my day sitting in a chair. When I need to do deep work, I find that I can focus better just sitting in a chair. I will sit on the floor for part of my day on my laptop. If I'm not able to sit on the floor during my workday, I sit on the floor at night while I'm watching TV or while I'm reading a book. And what I love about sitting on the floor is it's this way of like rewilding your hips. All of this time that we are all spending sitting, which is a lot, we know, our joints are all at 90-degree angles and we're getting stiff and sore. And that's part of the reason why sitting on the floor is really uncomfortable for most people and why the sit and rise test can be very challenging for people. And the other thing I love about it is in a way it's passive, because back to your very first question, I get it. Mobility is often the first thing people are crossing off their lists, right? We've been told we have to do 9,000 things to take care of our health.
I do it too. Like, let me be just very transparent. If I have to choose between mobility and leg day, I'm going to choose leg day.
You're going to do leg day.
Yeah,
and I mean, I own a mobility company and I'm exactly the same, by the way.
Yeah.
I mean, I am the same. Like I have a strong desire to exercise and train. I'm a busy working mom like you. At some point I have to make compromises. But what I love about sitting on the floor is that it is a thing that I can do for my mobility while I'm doing something else.
Yeah.
So I can do it while I'm working, or if I'm watching a movie with my family, I can sit on the floor. So if you come into our house at night, if anybody's watching TV, you'll see everybody's kind of sitting on the floor in front of the couch. We of course have a couch, and sometimes someone will be sitting on the couch, but oftentimes we're transferring between a chair and the floor, the couch and a floor. And the other thing that's so great about sitting on the floor is that your body naturally changes positions. You'll sit in a cross-legged position. You'll all of a sudden find yourself sort of uncomfortable in that position. So you change positions into 90-90, you long sit, you can kneel. And all those positions are like a passive hip mobility workout, so to speak. And the other thing that's so great about sitting on the floor in terms of compliance with doing a mobility practice is that we also, like many people listening to this, have a basket of mobility tools sitting in our living room in front of our TV. And I find that if I've just, taken a moment to sit on the floor and I'm sitting cross-legged and I look to my right and I'm like, oh, there's the foam roller. Well, I'm already down here. I'm going to go ahead and just foam roll my calves because I just did, a bunch of squats today. So I find that just the act of like literally forcing myself to sit on the floor has a cascading positive benefit in terms of my habits. I'm way more likely to actually mobilize. I am, I will tell you that after a hard leg day or hard workout, if I actually sit on the floor for half an hour, my hips and low back feel so much better. And it is just this practice that I think is so simple that all humans should be doing. And, if I get it, it's difficult to do a more formal mobility practice and get out the tools and foam roll and use balls. And sometimes mobility work can be really painful too. So it's like not always a thing you want to do at the end of a hard day. But sitting on the floor, you get so much bang for your buck. And then the other thing that's great about sitting on the floor is you have to get at least once a day. You get one rep of getting down onto the floor and getting back up off of the floor. So you're getting like one rep each day of practicing that. And, just to emphasize again, the one thing you need to know is that in cultures where people sit on the floor, eat on the floor, toilet on the floor, their incidence of low back pain goes way down. Their incidences of joint replacements go down, and the fall risk in the elderly is nearly zero. So for all the people who are never, ever, ever going to pick up a mobility practice, which is probably like 50% of the people listening to this podcast, just sit on the floor for 30 minutes or an hour every day. I swear your hips and low back will thank you.
I have now 5 questions that have come from that, which is just, first of all, fantastic. I was actually doing this yesterday. We have a couch that has a little, I guess, like a chaise on it. So there's like a little extended part. And you mentioned 90-90. So I'll just say like, that's one of my favorite stretches for my quads and for my inner. So you basically are putting 2 legs almost like, opposite of each other. And we'll put some links in the show notes for everybody to give them a visual idea. But each knee is bent at 90, and you can sort of bend backwards if you're trying to stretch the quad a little bit. You can turn into it if you're trying to get the adductors, or you're trying to get the adductors, or like the inner thigh muscles. It's fantastic.
It's almost kind of like I think the way it was described to us in the 80s, it was like the hurdler stretch a little bit. Like it's almost like a hurdler, right? Like it's a little bit, but I agree with you. I mean, that position, if I had been hitting it hard from a, strength standpoint or riding my mountain bike a lot, and I spend some time in 90-90, I feel so much better.
Yeah, I love that. So questions, I have a couple questions. So what I would do in practice, particularly for my I was more for my geriatric population who were much more frail, and we weren't even testing the sitting on the floor. I would start them on a chair, and they would usually be by something if they needed to just sort of hold on if they lost their sense of their sense of balance. Would you recommend chair unassisted sitting up from a chair and then progressing down to sitting on the floor, or would you say actually just get rid of the chair, just start getting like maybe some assistance or starting to get them to go on the floor? And then the other question I had was, on the floor, I typically cross my right leg in and my left leg is on top. Is there any, and of course, when I was doing your sit-up challenge, like it was much easier for me on the right side than it was on the left. So is there any benefit? I actually feel really weird when I cross left over right. So should we also be mindful of crossing our feet the other way? So there's two questions.
So I'll answer the second question first, which is yes. It is ideal just to kind of keep changing positions. And I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's because we all just were sitting crisscross applesauce like little kids and we had a way we did it. Because I'm like you, my right leg is always on the outside and my left leg is tucked in.
Yeah.
So I think anybody who tries this, especially if you haven't been sitting on the floor, you'll see that one side is more stiff than the other side. And so that is definitely worthy of practicing. And, the thing with this floor sitting is it's all about the freestyle. And what I love is that your body will tell you when you've sort of been in a position for too long. And so you naturally switch positions, and you can also, when you're sitting cross-legged, you can like pull your neck to the side and add in stretches and try to reach forward. And I mean, you can just sort of be active in this floor sitting position. And it just is so impactful. Now on the sit and rise test, I am definitely a fan of scaling this. If you feel at all nervous about this test, the first order of business would be to try it out on a chair or even your coffee table. Usually coffee tables are like a little bit lower than a regular chair.
Right.
And for whatever reason, people seem to kind of know, they have a sense of their own mobility and balance. And they know if they feel nervous about just lowering themselves to the ground. If you feel that sense of nerves, then you're someone who should try it on a scaled basis first. So lowering yourself to a chair or a coffee table. And then for people who struggle with this, one of the other ways to keep practicing it is to put, lower yourself onto a pillow, or, if you're in your gym, onto a couple of like low weight plates or an ab mat, or just something that elevates your rear end a little bit off the ground. And that's a great way to practice the test, because sometimes for people, you just can't, you don't have the mobility to do it from directly off the ground. But if you just add a little bit of height to it and practice that for a few weeks, and you'll find you can lower and lower and eventually be able to do it getting up and down off the ground. And, for people who are really uncomfortable with sitting on the floor and are really sort of far away from this, it may take 3 to 6 months to get to the point where you can comfortably do this. But I can tell you, we published Built to Move in April 2023, and the amount of people we've had reach out to us and say, when I was gifted this book or bought this book and tried this test, I thought there was no way I would ever be able to do this. And lo and behold, 6 months, 8 months, a year later, I can do this test. And what I think is so important for your listeners to know is that we've all heard, because we're on the internet, that, especially those of us perimenopause and menopausal women, that our bone density is going to decrease. And it's going to decrease even if we do all the right things like lifting weights and eating protein and doing all the things that our bone density is going to go down, and that our goal is just to try to limit that reality. And the same thing with our muscle mass. But unlike those two things, your mobility actually does not have to change as you age. And it's not too late. You can improve. I mean, the same goes for strength training, of course. I saw this great post yesterday where someone said, am I too late to strength train? To which the person said, well, are you alive? And the person said, yes. And then the coach said, well, then you're not. It's not too late for you to start strength training.
Are you alive?
Are you alive? And the same is true for mobility work. If you're still alive, it's not too late.
Yeah.
You can continue to improve and impact your mobility and balance and range of motion and strength until the end. So it's not too late.
I love it. I often say, like, the best time was 10 years ago. The second best time is today. It's like, just do something. Yeah. The other thing I will add to this, one of the things that I like to do when we're watching TV in the evening as a family or whatever, is I like to get into the little corner. So my little couch has that chaise lounge. There's like a little V there. And I like to squish myself in there and do the splits. So I will also, not that I used to be able to do splits when I was a gymnast, but not quite at 180 degrees yet. But I feel such a beautiful stretch in my adductors, which are often very tight after a leg day or a couple of days of leg days in the week. And it feels, initially you're like, oh my God, it's so tight. And then you're sitting there and you're like, oh, I feel everything sort of opening up a little bit. It's wonderful. And I do it at soccer practice too. That's the other thing I'll do.
Yeah, and that's one of those positions. Like, I do the same thing because I have the tightest adductors. Like, you would actually be like, dude, your adductors are so tight. But I do that too. I get into like my version of the splits. And again, if I wasn't already sitting on the floor, I would never do that. But it's just part of my routine. I'll watch like a whole hour-long TV show with my husband and sit on the floor the whole time. And I'm adopting 20 different positions, including the splits and 90-90. And I feel so much better. And the other way I feel so much better is when I get up the next day to train, I really notice a difference on the nights where I have these nights, I'm a human being. I have these nights where I'm like, I can't deal. I just have to lay on the couch. Like, I'm done as a human. Can't do anything active. I lay on the couch. And that's fine. But I notice it the next day in the gym in terms of my range of motion. When I'm trying to, squat or whatever movement I'm trying to do, I can tell that I feel a little more stiff, that I might need to spend a bit more time warming up. And so I can really see the downstream impact of not doing it once I start doing it a lot.